Hello, hello.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Dream Unfinished YouTube show. We are so excited that you're here today. We have a really wonderful and interesting topic. My name is Sarah Overton. I am the production manager for the Dream Unfinished Orchestra, and I am joined by the co-host of the YouTube show, Mr. Damian Norfleet.
Hello, hello, hello. It's so nice to see you.
It's so good to see you too. How's your weekend?
It's been pretty good. It's been pretty good. It's been busy, and busy is a blessing these days. So I will take that. I will take it. It's always good to be busy. And you are a vision in white.
Thank
You
you.
look great in white. Not many people can pull that color off. I think,
Thank you.
yeah,
I
yeah, well done.
appreciate it. I figured it was spring. I might as well lighten it up a little bit.
I mean, listen.
I think the Labor Day, that rule was passed, so I'm ready to go.
What is the rule? I thought it was just about shoes.
I thought it was no white before Labor Day.
Oh, not just shoes,
Not
any
any
vestment.
white. Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
okay,
And
okay.
then the beginning of the year, I think it resets. So we got
Gotcha.
9 months for this shirt.
A full gestation period for your fashion trends.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so today we have a really interesting topic. We're talking about some events that are going on in Hong Kong right now. We have been ruminating about this sort of police brutality piece and everything that's been going on in the US. And, you and I had a short conversation about, well, where else is this happening? Because it's not only a moment of reckoning for the United States, it's a moment of reckoning for a lot of pieces, a lot of places. And for Hong Kong especially, they're doing something really different. They have taken their businesses in Hong Kong and either relegated them as yellow or blue businesses. So there's been a lot of police brutality issues in Hong Kong as of late. And yellow businesses are reminiscent of those people who were protesting and used yellow umbrellas to shield folks from tear gas. So yellow businesses are anti-police establishment and blue businesses are pro-police establishment. So you've got a lot of very clear division here in Hong Kong, and it's primarily economic division, which I think is really interesting considering that Hong Kong is only behind New York and London in terms of their being an economic powerhouse, a global economic powerhouse. So the separation of businesses here is really trying to, kind of suss out who the blue businesses are and just sort of cut off their lines of funding. So it's a really, I think, powerful division between these yellow and blue businesses in Hong Kong.
Yeah. I have to share. So I was living and working in Hong Kong in 2019. I was there for a lot of the actual protests and some of the larger things. And a lot of my coworkers were artists and performers and dancers specifically, and young and very involved in the movement. A lot of them were college aged. It was very, very interesting to hear their like daily recalling of what's going on and hear what they're fighting for in their own words. Because it's very interesting. Like there is this blue and yellow labeling and factioning happening. But it even extends beyond just the businesses. It's really just like almost like it's just like a badge. It's really just, and it's so weird what it represents and I wasn't thinking in these terms when I first heard about the color coding of why people are so ardent about this. Hong Kong is like you said, it's a huge financial center. It's an art center. It's a cultural center. There are going to be a lot of changes if they come under the rule of China, right? Like even just things like internet access, censorship is going to, increase exponentially. And then there are certain communities who exist and live, like the queer community. They, they enjoy like kind of existence like people do in the West, like these other paralleled cities, like London, like New York. That's all really about to change. So there were a lot of people who were really talking in life or death sorts of context about this change that China is trying to do, because it's about 20 odd years early, right? Like they were
Right.
supposed to go back to Chinese rule, and 50 years was the agreement. It's only been about 23, 24 years now.
Yeah.
So it's a really, it's so dramatic because the stakes are so high. People are literally fighting for their lives. And then there's another population that is really, really, really ardent about this. It's because Hong Kong and like Macau and another smaller country are the only last three places where the Cantonese culture even exists, where they even speak Cantonese, right?
Right.
And that's going to come to a screeching halt when they're returned under Chinese rule. I mean, they're already making limitations on like how much Cantonese is taught in schools and things like that. And for example, and like, school things, also all the things they were doing, the demonstrations and the songs and stuff they were making have been outlawed already in schools.
Mhm.
And the major event that happened whilst I was there, which sparked like the last wave of highly visible protesting that was broadcast over the world, was in response to China passing this soft law about extradition. I'm saying that incorrectly. Extradition. So people being, accused or found guilty of a crime being sent to China
Right.
for, the trial and stuff, which it was terrifying to people who are protesting, because they don't need a cause to snatch you up and send you off to China. It was a very weird vibe, and it was a lot of violence. But curiously enough, and not to make light of the situation, you know, the protest in China, in Hong Kong, excuse me, I noted one thing that I thought was so curious.
Hmm.
They protested and demonstrated during like non-business hours. Like it was very interesting to see that like and you knew beforehand when they were going to, it was very organized and very, it just didn't really happen during business hours for the most part. Like the regular protests, like people knew after 5 we're going to be here, and on weekends we're going to be here. It was like surprisingly safe and business as usual during business hours. It was a very interesting thing. It was very different than our protests we had here, which were kind of like erupted immediately after something happened. It was reactionary to something happening. Theirs were very intentional to be, they weren't just doing it for themselves. They weren't just doing it for China. They were making sure the world would see what was happening. It was very intentional. I think that's the best word I can use to describe what was happening there. It's intense and intentional. And, I'm worried. I don't know I'm worried,
And there's so much to worry, so many people to worry for here. It's not only these businesses, like you said, this is multi-generational. This is
Yeah.
families and a whole culture, a whole Cantonese culture that we're talking about,
Yeah.
and an entire way of life. I think it's really interesting because some of the articles that I was reading about this, to your point, had said that after a certain time of day, after shops closed, when people were protesting in the streets, some yellow associated shop owners would leave their doors open so that people could come in and get food or get saline treatment for tear gas,
Yeah.
that had been sprayed on them. There was an app called What's Gap, which was a popular app in Hong Kong that drew a lot of folks who were associated with, just the yellow part of the movement. And that app was removed from Google's store. So, I mean, you see a lot of this just kind of interesting interplay between power structures as
Yeah.
well as all of these different events are happening.
And the thing that's really, so another thing that happened whilst I was there, I mean, a lot of them who studied American history to any degree or just interested in the culture were somewhat aware of some of our history of protest and struggle in our own country. And a lot of them would ask questions, what should we do? Types of questions, like what would work. I mean, it was it was wild to be having these firsthand conversations with people who were literally, you know, having conversations with me and then grabbing their gas mask and heading out
Right.
to go do this work. And it was it was surreal. But the thing that's really, the thing that was the scariest for me and the hardest for me to ask them
Mhm.
and then explain to them was, who is your audience? Like,
Mm.
to whom are you speaking? Who do you want to change whatever is happening? You know, and their answer was, you know, China. We want China to stop doing this. We want China to stop doing that. We want this. And I was like, you know, the difficulty with China being the audience for this sort of conversation is, are they interested in having this conversation? You
Yeah.
know, how does the Chinese government respond to this sort of action? How have they responded to similar actions in the past? You know,
Mhm.
you can learn from history about, you know, how to do these things. I mean, I would explain to them, we routinely look back to what did our predecessors do, the, you know, in the past when faced with these kind of situations. And I was just like, what happened the last time a group of people approached the Chinese government with similar requests? You know, what happened? And you know, it's a sad answer. You know, we are led to events like Tiananmen Square. You know, it's like we don't have a lot of other things to turn to for an example except for that, and that didn't really end so well
Right.
for the young people protesting for change. You know, so it's a very scary time for the people protesting in Hong Kong for these changes, especially what they're asking for and from whom they're asking. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to go back to something you said just to illustrate just kind of a full picture for folks that aren't really familiar with the history of Hong Kong, and kind of why it's separate from China in so many ways.
mm,
You know, from just doing a little bit of reading and thinking about this, you know, and this is my understanding as a cellist who's just sort of trying to think through this idea and look through history. You know, Hong Kong became separate from China as a result of the first Opium War. So in that war, China had lost and had to cede Hong Kong to Britain as kind of a port colony, as a part of the British Empire, right? So it went through, it kind of changed hands a couple of times, you know, and as much as a country can change hands, you know, it's not really up for debate in that way. But after the Second Opium War, you know, Britain acquired a little bit more of different parts of China as well. And then they signed a deal, the British signed a deal with the Chinese to lease Hong Kong and the new territories, the quote unquote new territories, for a period
mm,
of 99 years, right? So that lasted, like you said, it was only supposed to last up until I think that expired 97. And then there was supposed to be a 50-year period
right.
afterwards in which, you know, Hong Kong and these quote unquote new territories would retain some sense of democratic value, some sense of you know, just the ideology that they were under during the British rule. And that's not necessarily happening. That's not what we're seeing happen right now. We're seeing China kind of come back in and say, well, you know, we're here to reclaim Hong Kong and back as a part of this treaty.
Yeah, like 23 years early.
Right.
Right. I mean, and that was the first point of contention where everyone was just like, hey, you know, we've got another good 20 some odd years to make this change. Because because it's a lot of changes. It's not just the economy and the politics that are going to change. It's, you know, China has laws limiting family size
Yes.
for various reasons, but that law doesn't exist in Hong Kong at the moment. So like all of a sudden people are going to have to change, you know, that kind of approach to life and like culture and food and like the censorship that comes with China. It directly affects the arts. I mean, we're even seeing like people are trying their best to protest, and like some of my fellow artists were, you know, protesting through their music and through their dance and through their visual art, and
Yes, yes.
that's already being censored, you
Yeah.
know. And like it's, I mean, like the impromptu kind of flash mob like moments of people gathering and erupting in song and stuff that was happening fall winter of 2019. I mean, you know,
Yeah,
is no longer. You can be extradited now to China and face like, you know, some kind of tribunal about being a rebel or something. I mean, it's really really interesting.
yeah, it's I think an extremely you can't understate how difficult this is for the people in Hong Kong and
Yeah.
definitely the artists in Hong Kong. And I want to ask you, Damien, since you were over in Hong Kong,
Yeah.
being an artist yourself and working with artists, what was the artistic response? How did the folks that you were with kind of talk about their artistry, um, and the
Well,
future of their artistry and the power of it too?
yeah. Well, you know, I can liken it much to African American artists
Mm.
during this particular time. I mean, it was, I mean, instantaneously, everyone's efforts and scopes and energies just shifted. No matter what they were working on, dancing on, singing on, whatever. I mean, it immediately had to go to this. This
Right.
is life or death, and you immediately saw um, songs and works for the culture. You
Mhm.
know, because like again, a big part of this is about preserving their Cantonese slash Hong Kong culture.
Right.
So they were doing that, and I mean, it became, and then there were, funnily enough, there were lots of things of nationalism, like really reinforcing the Hong Kong flag versus the
Mm.
Chinese flag, and like you know, there was just a lot of I guess what we would call or recognize as patriotism. You know,
Interesting.
it really just started to fuel. It really just started to be, songs became anthemic, and dancing became very purposeful. There was lots of demonstrations. It was a very blurred line between just like demonstrations and performances.
Mhm.
You know, they became kind of one and the same. It was literally a moment where we would, you know, the curtain would go down on the show we were doing together, and they would grab their things and like go to their next venue, which would be like a public space somewhere, and change their clothes to get ready for their next performance or demonstration. It was rather intense. I mean, some of them were showing up. Some people I knew outside of my media job, but some other artists I just knew in town, you know, I would see them and we would talk, and they would like show up the next day with bruises, or like, you
Wow.
know, with horror stories. I mean, there was like, the thing that was interesting about it is you watch the news, and news is like news here, that you get reports and numbers and things, but some of the more graphic natures of things aren't just disclosed on the news. Well, they were being disclosed in these people's arts. Like one particular person I knew was a painter,
Mhm.
and his good friend who ended up making headlines, but she lost her eye
Oh.
at one of the protests, demonstrations, whatever you want to call these clashes. And it was, you know, it was like literally she
Mhm.
did not have an eye. And that became like, you know, they did like a dance like a week later where she was just kind of in them. I mean, it was just, it's incredibly powerful. And they made it, their art just became very real. It became very personal stories. The stakes became incredibly high. I mean, again, it was a very strong parallel in the artistic changes from their performers and artists, very similar to Black performers here. Like everyone just kind of, we had to address the issue. We all have to speak on the issue, play to the issue, you
Mhm.
know, whether it's just to bring attention to it or just as a means of getting it out. It's a
Mhm.
lot of pressure. You can't turn it off, you know? And so it's the art, like a lot of African American artists I hear know, like the art just didn't become a means of, uh, economic survival. It became like means of like just survival period, you know, to save their sanity, it's very difficult to even just think about. And because, you know, it's just, to have so many faces with some of these names, it's just difficult to see them come back bruised and beaten down and just have to get up and go to work the next day. And you know, it's difficult. It's difficult. And like you would think that sometimes, you know, a lot of times people derive comfort from numbers and like knowing you're not alone. But I think in this situation, it does the opposite, to know I know the pressures and struggles we are all going through here as a people, as a country, as a nation. And to just know that, it's going on there, and it was just wild to be there firsthand. But yeah, their music just it became very defiant for a while. And then when that is silenced, it's curious to see what their music sounds like now coming out of Hong Kong in 2020, where there's been literal like repercussions and like censorship for certain kinds of music if it sounds too, I don't know, what's the word, if it sounds too
hyper political, if it's too
hyper political and just, but specifically if it sounds like it's too critical, if it sounds like it's too critical of China, or sounds too critical of the police in Hong Kong, which was been infused with forces from China, according to most Hong Kong people. The Chinese government, denied a lot of that at the time, but a lot of people in Hong Kong were saying like, no, these are actual like agents from China here diffusing these situations. And it was very difficult. But yeah, the music and the art became very powerful and very strong and very anthemic and very clear. It wasn't a moment for a lot of abstract messaging and abstract approaches. It became very on the nose, very pointed. You didn't have to speak Cantonese to know what the songs were about, Yeah.
It's really interesting that you say that. And I want to touch on a couple of things, because there's definitely some music here that I want our listeners to really tune into. And I think the first of it, and then we'll get a little bit more into protest music and anthems and things like that. You shared with me this Remnants for Poet and Orchestra by James B. Wilson. And what struck me was the poet says at the very beginning of his speech, we've been here before. This is nothing new. We've been here before. And this, I feel, as you're just kind of talking about the struggles of folks in Hong Kong, that this is not a new thing. This is we've been here before. Just as we're feeling it here, just as we're feeling it all over our nation, we've been here before. So I do want to share a little bit of that with folks, because I just thought this was such a powerful, moving piece.
While you cue that up, I'm going to add one other thing, because it harkens on the point that we talked about before, is that this unfortunately isn't just here, isn't just in Hong Kong, because this piece is actually about a similar struggle happening in London, right? This poet is English and is actually speaking on the recent encounters they had there,
Right, absolutely. So, and that's a great point, because I think with this, it's just really interesting to see how all of this ties together. So this is the Chiniki Orchestra performing Remnants for Poet and Orchestra.
I'll stare at this image numerous times. My eyelids will pull and plead to blink to quell this heat slowly rising, and then it will hit me. I'll think, we've been here before, haven't we? Like the same programs every festive season, our stories are open wounds, haunting our children's children. They are comments set alight, burning embers through time. We have sat, forcefully swallowing our dignity. We've written countless books, thick pieces, essays, each of them now at a loss for breath, explaining the norms of black bodies laying on both sides like used furniture, next to traffic lights and speed bumps. Why black bodies, unbeknownst to close family and friends, enter police custody as their final resting place. We've been here before. It's not a feeling, it's all of them. All of them.
I'm gonna pause it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's so, it's, you know, the unfortunate takeaway I have from this is that we're sitting here talking about the yellow and blue factions in Hong Kong and their quest to, you know, retain their cultural identity and sovereignty and all this kind of stuff. And it's an encounter with the police that, you know, found itself at the center of that kind of demonstration. And then here we are in America with like a group of people who have been victims and been fighting racism since we've been Americans, like for, you know, what, 200 and something years, right? And like at the end, the center of all of it, at the center of the conflicts, we find police and encounters with that. Then there they are in London, having their issues, whatever they may be, but at the center of their conflict, it still comes down to like interactions with police. Like it's real. Why haven't we figured this out? Like, you know, it's just so, you know, it's like we tell our children, right? You don't solve your problems with your hands. It's just like this weird kind of basic, like, they just bring their big sticks to control people. And it's just so ridiculous that it's still happening. And it still happens at this, like, what are we going to do about it, right? Like, what do we do?
Right.
What were you going to say?
No, I totally understand. And I feel there is so much that people are trying to do. And it's my question for myself is always what I come back to is, as an artist, what do I do, right? What is the role of art in moving this forward and moving peace forward and trying to make change? Mm-hmm. And when you see something like that, for like this Remnants for Poet and Orchestra, and you are and not you, and I'm talking about an audience member is neutral about this. You can't sit in a seat and not have a very strong reaction to something like that. And the role of art, you know, serves so much purpose and just trying to seek to inform people, not only about an issue, but inform people about their own feelings, I think, in so many different ways. And I think that when we talk about protest music, and art pieces like this one, it's informing folks about how do I get close to what I actually feel, and how do I use that in a way that is helpful.
Yeah, you know, I agree with the big part of that. It is, I find it frustrating sometimes to be an artist at times like this, because you're right. It's the best tool that our art has is to shine a light on it, to bring attention to it, to make sure it's in the public forum for discussion and examination, and I dare say correction. But it is also frustrating because as a human being, you know, you see these atrocities happening and there's like, you know, that it is helpful to bring attention to, but at the same time, you also want your hands to be involved. You know, we need people to do all these things. We need people to march. We need people to legislate. We need people to to bring resources. You know, we need money to fund some of these changes and events, and sometimes you know, it is also important to shine a light on these things. But you know, don't you ever just kind of feel like, yes, I'm singing a song about this, or I'm writing a poem about this, and I'm doing this, and I've made sure thousands of people have been aware of this. But do you ever just kind of personally feel like, is this enough? Am I doing enough? I feel like I'm always wrestling with that. Like, I feel like I'm doing what I can do as an artist, but I feel like in addition to what I can do as an artist, am I doing enough as a person?
Right.
I feel like I constantly, that's my struggle, you know, like, am I doing enough as a person? And that literally keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
You know, like, are we doing enough? And there's the times of pandemic, and you have times of, you have family and you have friends, you've got obligations to like your life. And it's like finding the balance between that and like taking care of each other. It's a very complicated thing. And then you take on top of that, we're having complicated discussions about how to fix these things. And then you take on top of that, at some point, the powers that be decide, we don't want to discuss this anymore. And because you're not doing what we're not telling you to do, it's now okay for us to employ the executive branch and send our police to do things, whether it's Tiananmen Square, where, you know, depending on what report you read, hundreds or up to 10,000 people were killed, go home or be killed, you know. And then in Hong Kong, there are tens to hundreds to thousands, we don't know the exact number, people injured and hurt and killed when they just, you know, decide not, you know, it's amazing when we decide it's okay to put our hands on people. And
I know. And to go back and think through your question, am I doing enough? You know?
Yeah.
And that, because that keeps me up at night too. And my response is always yes. And, you know, it's, you can be an artist,
Yes,
and you can be an artist and get your hands dirty. You can be an artist and go and volunteer. You can be an artist and go and really be a part of these things in ways that serve that passion and that peace that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So I just think that it's really interesting though, with protest music specifically, and how musicians have guided people to change their mindset of, am I doing enough, into this yes and mindset of yes, there's something that I can do and I can be a part of. I want to look at you know, the Hong Kong protest music, because I think it's really interesting how these things have just sort of woven themselves together.
Yeah.
You know, protest music and the music and art of people from all over the world. So I'm going to share my screen again, so we can take a listen to this too.
And while you're pulling that up, I want to add one other thing. I think what we do as artists, we also, oh, it's ready. I'll share it after this.
Okay. All right. Yeah, this is really interesting. This is a Hong Kong orchestra performing in a mall.
Oh, I've been in.
Yeah. Yeah, so really short clip, but what I think is so interesting about that is you heard like these little snippets of "Do You Hear the People Sing" from Les Mis. Yeah, yeah, you hear a lot of just kind of march music. It's really interesting how you know, people can be a part of a movement through the music, and that music speaks despite wherever this movement is happening in the world.
Yeah, and you know, that's a great example of what I was going to say before. I'm just going to add on to that. Yes, we can shine light on issues and bring attention to things, but you know, that illustrated something else. You know, that it also motivates people. You know, when you hear certain kinds of music, it gets you energized, and you know, that's what anthems do, right? So I mean, there's power in that. And then The other thing I think it does, and I think this is the most valuable thing, I was really sitting here thinking about this during that clip about what I want my art to do and hope that it does. Yes, I want to shine light on certain issues, but I think what our music and art and stuff also does is it really encourages people to actually think about the issue at hand, because that's the thing a lot of people don't do. We go right from excited to action, and we don't always sit with that and think and figure out answers and solutions. And I think that's something our art can do. It really does put people in a space, even if it's only for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, right? To just think about it for a while. And I think that is incredibly valuable and powerful.
I so agree. And I think that a lot of people need to do a lot more introspection. That, that's my call to everybody.
Right.
Sit there and think about actually how you are going to do the things that you want to do, that you say you want to do, right? The effect that you're having on other people, who you want to be and who you are, and how far apart those two ideologies are. And I think that's a really interesting tie-in to our featured piece for today, which is a piece called Self-Talk. And this is by the composer Austen Young Alex, and he's a really wonderful composer from Hong Kong. Composed a piece for electroacoustic instruments and violin, and it's sort of in response to everything that's happening in Hong Kong, but also kind of brings together this old world, new world, old world with violin, new world with this electroacoustic music, and the merge of them to build something that's really introspective. Since a lot of this protest music in Hong Kong has been just suffocated for
silenced, absolutely silenced.
Absolutely
silenced. Yeah.
This piece is definitely much more introspective in that way. So I'm really excited to share this with folks, because I think that it speaks to a lot of these things. So here is Self-Talk, at least a few minutes of it. I'm gonna pause it there.
Yeah, Alex Au. So yeah, this guy's name is Alex Au, is the composer. The violinist was Patrick Yim. I think he's actually born in Hawaii, but he works a lot. I think he's like a head of a music group or something in Hong Kong. He's primarily based in Hong Kong now. Both fantastically talented. Alex started this group, actually, this new music group, a contemporary group. They do all kinds of great things. But yeah, that piece really does illustrate like we said, we have both admitted to being up late at night, because there's a lot of things going on that require lots of thought and sussing. We've got to suss through a lot of these things and figure out how we feel, right? The thought part is just so important, and everyone should be up late at night. There's so much going on. If you're not up at night, I don't even understand how you're not. Like, there's just so much going on, right? Pandemic, protests, all kinds of. I mean, the United States is in a mess. We're in a mess. Hong Kong, we're talking about. I mean, they're going through a lot. London's going through. The world's going through a lot. But it is so important to think about these things. And I love that piece. The piece that he talks about it's called Self-Talk, because it is that he's like, I think he literally describes like the violin as being like your conscious stream of thought, and it's reacting to the subconscious, which is illustrated by the electronic sounds. And that's why they're playing off of each other. But yeah, it's thought. We're in this crazy time. We've got to think and take our time and figure out some stuff. We're in a bad place. We've got to figure out some solutions and help those that are equipped to figure out the answers. We're not all blessed in socio-political science. We don't all know a lot of things. We don't have to come up with the answer. We can at least support those who are equipped to know the answer. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we're coming to the end of this episode here, and
no.
I know. And I think one thing to think about too in this point of introspection, it's not get right with yourself and then help others. It's do both. It's get right with yourself and help others. You can do both at the same time. You can handle it, I promise.
And is the key word, isn't it?
Yes,
right.
Yes.
We can multitask.
Yeah, we got it. We got it. We can do it. So I think with that, I really just want to thank everybody for joining us for this conversation today.
Yes.
We're going to drop some resources and ways in which you can help and kind of be a part and be informed about what's going on in Hong Kong, be informed about what's going on in London and what's going on here. Definitely the links to all of the wonderful music that we shared today. So,
and Sarah, I also want to thank you for this conversation. It's been great. It's been cathartic. And I also want to encourage everyone watching, what we have going on here is very necessary. It's very necessary to discuss these things with like-minded people and people who may not be. You just need to discuss this. So if you don't have a group with which you feel like you can discuss things, like feel free to drop a message in the chat, send us a message. We'll discuss it, here. You can be a part of our group, because it's just really important for us to have these kinds of communities where we can discuss these ideas. It's what our art does. It's what we artists encourage. It's our gift to the world. We create these spaces where we can exchange ideas. So I encourage everyone to do so. If you don't have your own circle, feel free to drop a chat and we'll get back to you.
Oh, beautifully said, Damien. I love it. So thank you, Damien. Thank you, everyone. And we'll look forward to seeing you again right here